What makes a game a masterpiece? It's a question that I've been mulling over in my head for the past couple days and also just asking everybody I meet. And usually it leads to great conversations or people being like, who are you and how dare you speak to me? But I do think it's an interesting question because if you think about masterpieces from the perspective of film or books or music, I feel like we kind of as a society have decided what makes a masterpiece. It's kind of a you know it when you see it scenario. But it's this combination of like critical consensus, sometimes commercial consensus, awards and nominations, and just generally how we accept things into the culture. It's not like a piece of media needs to hit all of those criteria to be considered a masterpiece, but some alchemic fusion of all of them, or even just some of them, will lead people to eventually say this is a masterpiece. The thing about games in particular is that they're made up of so many different pieces, and all of them need to be firing on all cylinders for people to look at it and say, yeah, that's one of the greats. That's a classic. And that's not to say it's not true of other mediums. If you look at film, for example, writing, acting, directing, score, cinematography, there's so many different aspects that make up a movie, but there's like an exponentially huge amount of aspects of a game that need to be juggled as well. I thought for this video, instead of just talking about what makes a video game a masterpiece, it might actually be better to just show examples instead. So I picked a bunch of games from 2015 to 2025. Games that I think are considered modern masterpieces in video games. If you agree with these takes, that's cool. If there are ones that you think I left out, please let me know in the comments. But what I like about this structure in particular, starting in 2015 and going to 2025, is I think the closer we get to now, the hotter the takes are. But let's start in 2015 with games that I think we could probably all agree are masterpieces today. I feel like 10 years is enough time to have settled on what makes a game a masterpiece. So let's start there. 2015's Undertale by Toby Fox is, I think, brilliant in that it is an amalgam of about 1 million different influences. I think the more ideas and pieces of media you pull from, the better your original work ends up becoming. And Undertale definitely looks a lot like some games, but feels a lot like 100 different games, and by feeling like so many things at once becomes its own entity. Obviously, the music is amazing and the characters are incredible, but one of the things that I think makes Undertale shine is just the cultural impact it's had on games and how we talk about branching narratives. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil it for you in case you somehow haven't played Undertale yet, but you should go play Undertale, and I think by the time you're done with all of it, you will also agree it's a masterpiece. Also in 2015 was FromSoft's Bloodborne, which, in my opinion, is their masterwork. Even by 2015 standards, FromSoft have been making games for a really long time, and at this point, we're past Demon Souls, we're past Dark Souls, and a lot of the elements of those games have started to already percolate in a lot of other video games designs. The brilliance of Bloodborne in a lot of ways is rooted in the fact that it's almost like a victory lap. Like, while a lot of other developers were just kind of starting to explore the idea of Souls-likes as a genre, here comes FromSoft being like, yeah, go play in the sandbox, look what we got, and immediately makes the best Souls-like. That's kind of the weird irony of Bloodborne to me, is that the genre is considered Souls-likes, but I actually think Bloodborne is the best example of a Souls-like we have, despite the creators also being the people who made Dark Souls. I could talk forever about why I think Bloodborne is great. I think the art direction is amazing, the music is amazing, the writing is amazing, and the way it puts you in the shoes of somebody experiencing cosmic horror in real time, unmatched. Absolutely unmatched. 2016 is an interesting year. I have 2 games here, both of which were released and then immediately released again in VR, and those are Rez Infinite and Superhot. Both of them are amazing games by themselves. Rez Infinite obviously being a remake of Rez on the Dreamcast, which in my opinion is also a masterpiece, so this is a little bit cheating. But what Enhance, the developer, was able to do with Rez Infinite in terms of taking that game, modernizing it, widening the scope of it in a big way, and then if you have a VR headset, putting you actually into the cyberspace of Rez, I think in my opinion is actually one of the greatest showpieces for virtual reality and what's possible in there. On a similar note, Superhot coming out of the gate with this extremely strong artistic aesthetic, these red villains coming at you in stark white rooms and time only moving when you move, becomes, first of all, the best John Wick simulator ever made, but second of all, when you're in it in VR, again, kind of feels like you're living an art house piece. Both games are really devoid of narrative, but have really big ideas aesthetically about what VR can be and can look like, and why you would want to play something in VR instead of just sitting in front of your television. I feel like a lot of developers over the past decade, as VR has become more and more prevalent, have just tried to take game that already exists and put it in VR, and that's not always a thing that works. These 2 games, however, are showpieces for VR. If you haven't played Rez Infinite, you absolutely should do it. What it's got going on thematically is really, really interesting. If you're anything like me, I think you'll find yourself surprisingly emotionally overwhelmed playing Rez, a game that technically like doesn't have a story. And again, Superhot just feels like you exist in this cool art gallery and you get to smash it up however you want. 2017 saw the release of the Nintendo Switch and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is probably the easiest slam dunk masterpiece shout out on this entire list, realistically. The impact that Breath of the Wild has had on the open world idea is still something we're seeing developers explore in a big way as they leave behind the Ubisoft Assassin's Creed icons on a map concept. These larger open spaces that ask you to walk out into them and explore to your heart's content are significantly more immersive than asking yourself, which of these little activities via icons on a map do I want to do now? That doesn't mean Breath of the Wild is devoid of activities like that, but it does mean it's more immersive to find yourself within them than it is in something like Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a little bit more checklisty and came out around the same time. No shade on Horizon. I know people love Horizon, but I wouldn't put it on this list is all I'm saying. This one's personal for me, but Hollow Knight came out in 2017. I think this is maybe the greatest Metroidvania ever made. I think it takes everything great about Super Metroid and Castlevania and Dark Souls, and again, kind of like what I was saying about Undertale, pulling from just millions of different ideas and creates something that feels unique and special and sad and lonely and triumphant. Even if you don't connect at all with the narrative and the lore that they're trying to build, just the act of playing Hollow Knight, I think, immediately pulls you in with its really tight understanding of control and combat. That plus the visual design of the world of Hollow Nest and the score, it just all culminates in something that feels, again, like you're playing something that belongs in a museum. It's fitting then that a month after this video comes out, Hollow Knight Silksong is going to be playable in a museum in Australia. So shout out to Australia for making my point for me. You're the best, Australia. You have giant spiders. I'm afraid to visit you because of it, but at least you'll have Silksong in a museum, so that's cool. The last one for 2017 is Nier Automata. It's this holy fusion of Platinum Games and Square Enix and legendary designer Yoko Taro, creating, in my opinion, one of the best explorations of humanity and community available in a video game. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's a game that you need to beat multiple times if you want to understand why I would put it on this list. And if you've tried playing it and abandoned it at any point before finishing it, you probably don't get why I would put it on this list. It's a game that's constantly shifting and changing and breaking its own rules repeatedly, and it also just feels sick to play. I think it's Platinum Games at the peak of their combat design. I think it's Yoko Taro at his most approachable, despite being who he is, and it just makes for an incredible video game. Return of the Obra Dinn, developed by Lucas Pope, came out in 2018. Lucas Pope was previously best known for making a game called Papers, Please, where you played as a border patrol agent, checking documents and deciding if people can cross the border or not. It is a harrowing, horrifying video game that will make you feel absolutely terrible while you play it. And Return of the Obra Dinn is a kind of interesting swerve in that it's a detective game. The Obra Dinn is a ship that arrives back in port with nobody on board, and your job as a detective is to use your compass that allows you to see when and how people died to basically reconstruct the events of everybody's death. There were 60 people on board and all 60 people died. You don't know anything about these people, so you need to deduce their names and faces based on what you have in a ledger and what you're seeing via these memories. It's an absolutely brilliant game and one of those ones that I think a lot of people who play it walk away from saying, I wish I could wipe my memory of having played it and do it all over again. And it also just has like the sickest bitmap art style of all time. I love Return of the Obra Dinn. The look of this game has influenced the visual design I use for this YouTube channel, which I'm sure you're seeing right now. It's an amazing video game, and also the only one I have listed in 2018. 2019 is banger after banger after banger. I don't know how this happened, but 2019 just seems to be a year where masterpieces were coming out left and right. I'll actually start with two that I don't feel in my heart of hearts, but I know a lot of people probably do feel very strongly about. The first one is The Outer Wilds, and the second one is Disco Elysium. The Outer Wilds is a game where you shoot yourself off into space and figure out how to prevent the entire universe from being destroyed. It is, like Return of the Obra Dinn, a game that I think a lot of people wish they could wipe from their memory and play again. It's a game that I particularly had a really hard time playing. I don't think I connected with it on the same level as a lot of people. That said, I love the score, I love the look of it, and I like the idea of it, and I've talked to enough people who think of it as this monumental experience that it really feels like it belongs here. Same is true of Disco Elysium. It's a game that I've tried many, many, many times to get into and just absolutely haven't, but the amount of incredible writing and discussion I've seen about this game on the internet really leads me to believe that it is one of those that belongs on this list as well. Games that I really do love that are on this list that came out in 2019, Sayonara Wild Hearts by Simogo, I think is one of the most incredible ideas for a rhythm game ever made. It's a game with a very loose narrative, but has big emotional highs that all come via being absolutely blasted with maybe the best soundtrack ever in a video game. They describe it as an interactive pop album, and that is what it feels like while you're playing it. I remember when it first came out on Apple Arcade, I downloaded it on my iPhone, and I just started showing it to people around my office. I was like, this is the future of video games. It feels like a game from 2050 that somebody sent backwards for us to play. I think we're so lucky to have Sayonara Wild Hearts. An incredible thing. 2019 also saw the release of Slay the Spire, which is like a perfect deck builder top to bottom. There's a Mount Everest, I think, of games that have tried to chase the success of Slay the Spire, but Slay the Spire just stays right at the top. It's probably unfair to compare every other deck builder that comes out to Slay the Spire, but that's what happens when you make a game this good. Even all this time later, I find that at least once a year, I have a month where I'll download Slay the Spire on my phone again and just get so wrapped up in it. It absolutely holds up, and there's a sequel coming out soon. That's pretty wild. Finally, in 2019 is Kojima Studios' Death Stranding. After his very public breakup with Konami, Hideo Kojima formed Kojima Studios and released Death Stranding. In the lead up to release, there were a lot of trailers that I think had people scratching their heads. It looked completely unintelligible from like a plot perspective, but had all of this extremely evocative imagery. I'll be honest, I didn't love Death Stranding when it came out. When I first sat down to play it, I didn't really have that aha moment with it. It wasn't until the pandemic hit and I was literally quarantined in this apartment that I finally sat down to play it all over the course of a couple days straight, and had basically like a religious experience with it. On one hand, it feels like the best kinds of art house films that just beat you over the head with their ideas, with characters with names like Dead Man and Die Hardman and whatever, but it's also this really personal story about humanity and connection and not fearing being emotionally available with others. Now, on the other hand, it's this really meditative walking simulator in the most literal way possible. Walking simulator is frequently used as an insult on the internet, which I find kind of silly. But in the case of Death Stranding, Kojima's like weaponizing the idea of walking simulator. All of the gameplay revolves around being the best at walking. I think it's a brilliant game. I'm excited to put more time into its sequel, but as a standalone piece, I think Death Stranding is absolutely something that deserves to be on this list. All right, now we're in 2020. We're in the last 5 years. I think this is where people are going to start to disagree with me more than they agree with me, if I were to guess. And let's start off strong. The Last of Us Part 2. The weirdest thing about how I feel about The Last of Us Part 2 is that I don't really like The Last of Us Part 1. It's not a game I enjoy playing. I don't find the story to be particularly interesting, if I'm being honest. I think unlike Undertale, The Last of Us pulls from too few pieces of inspiration and ends up just feeling like a mashup of like 3 things. I also don't love the way it plays. That's besides the point. I'm not here to bash on the first game. I think the second game is remarkable. Obviously, we're not talking about Crash Bandicoot era Naughty Dog here. We're talking about post-Uncharted era Naughty Dog that's very interested in narrative and storytelling and character. And I think what they managed to do here, putting us in the shoes of Ellie specifically as the protagonist, is maybe unmatched. It's a long revenge story that takes place over a long period of time. And I think one of the most interesting things about it is that you will frequently find yourself disagreeing with what Ellie is trying to do. So many games are interested in choice and giving players freedom to decide whether to do something, what is right and wrong. And I found that while playing The Last of Us Part 2, I was frequently like shaking my head in disappointment at the decisions that Ellie was making, but because I am the one playing it, I just have to go through with it. In that way, it's kind of completely uninterested in choice. It's just interested in showing you Ellie's growth over the years of the story takes place. I have a lot more thoughts about The Last of Us Part 2. If you want to hear 5 hours of them, you can go listen to our bonus episode about it from Into the Aether, a low-key video game podcast. But let's move on to another 2020 game, which I actually think everyone will probably agree with, Hades. Hades felt like such a breath of fresh air because there are so many games that have tried to tackle the what if a roguelike had a story to tell of it all, and Hades just knocked it absolutely out of the park. Zagreus as a protagonist is incredible. The supporting cast also incredible, and mechanically I think it's a game that stands up to the best roguelikes of all time. The fact that it's able to tell an emotionally raw story that like may or may not have you sobbing by the end of it is the kind of thing that pushes it up into masterpiece status. It's got good art, it's got good music, it's got good acting, it's got good writing. It's Hades, baby. I'm excited for the second one. I've only played a little bit of it in early access. And I'll say from my experience playing that little bit of early access, I think they nailed it. I think they got it. 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim is a game by Vanillaware that I think a lot of people would consider to be a visual novel with strategy elements, which is probably not the wrong way of thinking about it. It's a game that puts you in the shoes of one of its 13 protagonists and allows you to play any of their stories kind of in any order. The more of some stories you play, the more stories you unlock for other characters, and in between all of these stories are literal mech battles where you need to protect the Earth from invaders. There are a few pieces of media and even fewer games where I found myself literally yelling at the screen at plot revelations the way I was with 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. It's a game I played twice even though I knew everything that happened because I just wanted a better understanding of it. And I think unlike a lot of people, my hottest take about this game probably is that I think the combat's really good. When you're done with it, and this isn't a spoiler, they just kind of give you a bunch of challenge battles that you can do if you want to, and I played a lot of them. 2020 also saw the release of Kentucky Route Zero TV Edition, which was the final complete package of every chapter of Kentucky Route Zero, which had been released over the course of many years. Kentucky Route Zero is a game by a team named Cardboard Computer. They released the first chapter in 2011 and the final chapter in 2020. It's a game that I've seen described as the next great American novel as a video game, and I completely agree. It's a game that interrogated the feeling of the American populace after the economic crash in 2008. Unfortunately, the game feels just as relevant now as it did then, and maybe always will, as long as we live under capitalism the way we do. But it's also a game about found family, and it's a game about how leaning on others will allow you to cope with the struggles that we're all dealing with in some capacity. There's kind of like a David Lynch aspect here. The music is absolutely amazing. There are a couple moments where it literally becomes a musical or a stage play or an art gallery that you get to walk through. It's really hard to pin down exactly what Kentucky Route Zero is at any given moment, and that's one of the things that makes it a masterpiece. Okay, this one really feels like cheating in some ways, but in 2021, we saw the release of Mass Effect Legendary Edition. The reason I'm including it is, first of all, I just think Mass Effect is a miracle of a franchise. The fact that we got those 3 games and that they're as good as they are is absolutely incredible. The amount of people and the amount of work that needed to go into making those 3 games that good is not something we see very often, and maybe something we'll never see again. Fingers crossed we will. I don't want to be a doomer about it. Mass Effect Legendary Edition, taking all 3 of those games and putting them in one place with a seamless transition between all of them and bumping the graphical capabilities to kind of an even playing field, makes for one of gaming's best bundles, definitely, but also, in my opinion, consolidates the franchise into one specific piece of inspiration that I think people will be pulling from for the rest of time. There are obviously remakes and ports and remasters being released all the time, but I think Mass Effect Legendary Edition is the one that gets it the most right. And it's one of the only times that I would ever say, don't go play the originals, play Legendary Edition instead. The Forgotten City is a standalone remake of a Skyrim mod from 2015, where you play as a time traveler who gets sucked into this Roman city. Within the city, there's one rule that guides everybody, which is that if one person sins, everybody dies. You're told at the beginning of the game that somebody is going to sin that day, and your job is to figure out who it is and stop them before they do. The more I tell you about this game, the more I would give away, and I kind of don't want to do that. If you haven't played it, you should absolutely give it an afternoon and give it a shot. I played through the whole game in one sitting. It definitely is not short, but that didn't stop me. But at its highest level, the Forgotten City just feels like a watch. It feels like such an intricate little machine. I love it. I just replayed it again recently. It's still great. Check it out if you haven't. The only game I have listed for 2022 is Elden Ring. It's also the only game by a developer who we've already talked about in FromSoft. Elden Ring feels like the crown jewel on dark fantasy as a genre. I think everyone who finished Elden Ring had the exact same experience, which is like, you just can't stop playing it. You can't walk away from it. Elden Ring's world feels completely unknowable and terrifying at all times, but also feels like something that compels you to explore every single inch of it. In the same way this game is clearly inspired by aspects of Breath of the Wild, I think we're just starting to see the impact that Elden Ring is having on the video game landscape. And once again, it feels like FromSoft just flexing, man. Like, they're so good at what they do. They knocked this one completely out of the park. 2023 saw the release of Baldur's Gate 3, a game with over 2 million words in its script. Baldur's Gate 3 feels like the logical endpoint of an idea that game developers have had literally since the beginning of video games as a medium, which is, how do we turn Dungeons and Dragons into a video game you can play? It's got incredible characters, more choices than you would ever know how to explore realistically, and multiplayer, which feels like a miracle. Baldur's Gate 3 isn't for everybody. I actually didn't finish it myself, but I know a lot of people who did and then finished it again and again and again and again, and more power to them. I love that for them. But my experience of playing Baldur's Gate 3 was just the feeling of being completely overwhelmed almost at all times, kind of in a good way. So few games give you that much choice, and the ones that do are probably also by Larian Studios. Void Strangers, another 2023 video game by the team System Erasure. It's a game that you could consider to be a Sokoban game, which is like a block pushing puzzle, although it's not exactly about pushing blocks. It's about taking them and putting them elsewhere. It's got a very like original Game Boy or TI-83 calculator visual aesthetic. And the thing about Void Stranger and System Erasures games in general is that everything I've said is maybe not even the top layer of what this game is trying to accomplish. There's so much happening here mechanically and narratively that really saying anything I think would be giving too much away. If you want to really dip your toe in it, I would recommend giving Super Eye Patch Wolf's video about the game a shot. I'll be honest, my first experience playing Void Stranger, I didn't really connect with it on the level that a lot of people around me were, and then after watching a little bit of that video, I went back to it, and man, is that game cool. It's one of those pieces of media that I feel like is just going to inspire the coolest art years from now. I think in 10 years, the coolest game anybody plays, when we ask the developer what their main piece of inspiration was, they'll be like, Void Stranger changed my life. And I love that for them. 1000 Times Resist came out in 2024 by a team called Sunset Visitor. Believe it or not, they were a theater troupe before they decided to make video games. And as their first video game, man, it's almost hard to encapsulate everything that 1000 Times Resist is trying to say. But I think if Death Stranding is accidentally about COVID-19, despite coming out before COVID-19 existed, 1000 Times Resist is very much about how the pandemic has impacted us as a society. Not only that, but it's about cycles of violence and the way we treat our friends and our family and our parents, and specifically ourselves. In the game, you play as Watcher, who is a clone of the All-Mother, an immortal teenage girl who is the only one who didn't get killed by the global pandemic that was raging the world. And your job is to commune with the other clones who are in charge in the sci-fi world and see if any of them are maybe harboring feelings of dissent against the All-Mother. That's also selling the game too short. There's a lot going on here, and you should definitely play it for yourself. And when you're done, if you want another 5-hour podcast to listen to, go check out .zip's great breakdown of 1000 Times Resist. I'll link to that in the description. Hello, I'm editing this and also watching Antique Roadshow, and it just occurred to me that I didn't include Dragon's Dogma 2 in the 2024 section, which I really meant to. That's another one that I think a lot of people wrote off pretty immediately because the way it was, I think, received by the public made a lot of people think it was going to be another Elden Ring. Like, if you like Elden Ring, you're going to love Dragon's Dogma 2. But Dragon's Dogma, as a franchise, it's only 2 games, but as a franchise, is a franchise that's really obsessed with just kicking your ass. You need to be hyper prepared for everything that you do if you want to go out into the world. The world is scary and violent and hard to make your way through. The amount of systems at play in Dragon's Dogma feel like insurmountable as a player. Like, it's hard to wrap your head around how to survive. But over the course of play, you will eventually get to a point where you feel like you have mastered the world. And also, the thing about Dragon's Dogma 2 is, like, it is one of the funniest games ever made. The amount of intentional and unintentional comedy in that game is off the charts. I love it to death. And I think it's one that a lot of critics I know really loved, but the general population seemed to not as much. My hope is that it gets like reappraised years from now. I think eventually people will come around on Dragon's Dogma 2. And that'll be a good day. 2024 also saw the release of UFO 50, a game I reviewed on this YouTube channel, and you can go watch that. But UFO 50 is a collection of 50 games that are modeled after the late 80s and early 90s in terms of video game design. And they are somehow miraculously all great games on their own right. All 50 of them are incredible. They're not mini games, they're just full games. But they also kind of tell a loose story about the people who made them. The thing I said about UFO 50 in that review is that if all 50 games had been released individually outside of this package, there are a bunch of them that would have been Game of the Year contenders for me. The fact that they're all combined into this one package is literally a miracle to me. But for now, as one cohesive package, UFO 50 is an amazing experience. It feels like digging through a bargain bin in like an EB Games in the late 90s and finding accidentally one of the best games you've ever played over and over and over and over again. It's an unbelievable undertaking to have made 50 games and released them, and no question in my mind that it belongs on this list. It's 2025, and I think there's one game from this year that belongs on this list. It's another one I reviewed on this channel, and that's Blueprints. Blueprints is this holy union of roguelike and puzzle game that I think becomes greater than the sum of those two parts. Regardless of how you feel about the term Metroidvania, it is one of those, and it is an incredible one of those. The thing that I think catches a lot of people off guard about Blueprints is that despite just being a great game mechanically, there is also a really compelling narrative being told behind the scenes. It's a little bit hard to piece together on your first couple runs or even your first dozen runs, but once you've beaten the game a couple times, once you've gotten to the end of a run and you start to take in the larger scope of what's going on. It's this amazing story about like dissent against authoritarianism. It's a hard thing to talk about because the more I say, the more I'll obviously spoil some of the best pieces of that video game, but there's always a lot more than meets the eye with Blueprints, and I think if you're anything like me, you will have a notebook out and you'll be taking copious notes while playing this thing and completely obsessed with it for multiple weeks at a time. And that's it. Those are the games that I think are masterpieces from the last 10 years. If there's one that you think should be on the list that I didn't put on here, let me know in the comments. I'd be curious to hear your reasoning. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you like the video, share it with somebody else maybe. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, maybe subscribe. Also, big shout out to everybody who joined the Patreon in the last week. The amount of support I've gotten immediately is honestly overwhelming and humbling, and I'm so ridiculously grateful for it. And if you want to learn more about what's on the Patreon, head over to patreon.com/wavelengths. Bye, everybody.